Hello, I'm Dango Rose. Welcome to the Mountaineer Podcast, where everybody's listening. The Mountaineer brings you the latest news of the Peak to Peak region, in print, online, through our podcast, social media, and special publications. Now, listen in to the latest news of the area with our local journalists.
This is the Mountain Ear Podcast, and I'm Maryann Rosen, bringing you history, lore, or stories from or about the mountains you live in. Gratefulness has been shown to have many benefits. Studies show that those who practice being grateful sleep better, have fewer aches and pains, have increased empathy, improved psychological health, less aggression, and even greater self-esteem. Gratitude is more than a polite gesture. It's a transformative emotion that allows us to focus on the positive aspects of our lives, fostering a sense of appreciation and contentment. Gratitude activates specific neural pathways, promoting feelings of happiness and reducing stress. As such, daily acts of gratitude perhaps should become more commonplace. Expressing thanks to our loved ones, writing thank you notes, performing acts of kindness, volunteering, keeping a gratitude journal, or starting a gratitude jar are all small and easy ways to show thankfulness. November, as National Gratitude Month, is a reminder to us to be thankful. However, the biggest day reminding us of that is Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving has become a day to feast, be with family and friends, and to give thanks and be grateful for everything in our lives, big or small, and for everyone in our lives. However, how did the holiday of Thanksgiving begin, and does it really have anything to do with a legendary fall feast between native tribes and so-called pilgrims in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1621? The answers are found in the complex and darker story and real history of the holiday. Although this story began far from Colorado and has no direct connection, the treatment of indigenous Americans in Massachusetts set the tone across the land for the treatment of all native tribes. The saga does begin back in the 17th century, when the land around what is now Plymouth, Massachusetts, was inhabited by the Narragansett and Wampanoag native tribes, who were sometimes at odds over hunting and gathering grounds. Ships from England and other countries would often moor offshore, sending men onto the land to take lumber and to find slaves. One of those enslaved was a member of the Patuxet, a smaller tribe who were part of the Wampanoag Nation. Tisquantum, usually now spoken of as Squanto in history books, was abducted in 1614 and sold into slavery in Spain. He escaped and made his way to England, where he learned English before returning to North America in 1619. Upon his return, he found that his tribe had been ravaged by smallpox. At around this same time, after landing in Provincetown and Eastham on Cape Cod, the Mayflower, carrying colonialists from England, arrived in what is now Plymouth, where they built their village where the Patuxet village once stood, as the land was already cleared. The myth goes that all on the Mayflower were escaping religious persecution, and that upon arrival they were met by peaceful, helpful indigenous Americans, that they required native help to survive, and that the native tribes provided that aid. Myth is usually surrounded by some truths, and as such, so is this one. The actual reality was that although many on the Mayflower were leaving their homes for religious freedom, there were others who came for economic and financial gain. As for the Wampanoag tribe, their leader, Osamoquin, was the one to initiate contact after a time of very wary avoidance. The relationship was more political rather than interpersonal. The Wampanoag had previously only had negative experiences with Europeans, and now were hoping an alliance with the Pilgrims would allow them more access to trade and to help them gain the upper hand over the rival Narragansett tribe when it came to land. Tisquantum, or Squanto, was chosen as a mediator due to his knowledge of English by Massasoit. With help from the Wampanoag, some of the Pilgrims did indeed survive their first winter. As was the tradition of the times in many countries, including England, a feast giving thanks for a good harvest in or around November was held. Other Thanksgivings had been recorded prior to this feast, including one in Spanish Florida in 1565, Newfoundland in 1578, Popham County in what is now Maine in 1607, and Jamestown, Virginia in 1607 and 1610. Historians are unsure if the settlers invited the Native Americans. Some accounts suggest the Wampanoag's men came to the settlement after hearing celebratory gunfire. Others think their presence was a coincidence, with then Wampanoag leader Massasoit either visiting on diplomatic grounds or Wampanoag people having been planting nearby. In any event, approximately 90 Wampanoag and 50 settlers, all male, came together to pray, play games, and feast on deer, game fowl, cornmeal, succotash, pumpkins, and cranberries. There would have been no turkey or pies. The exaggerating dinner with confections was popularized by author Jane G. Austen in her fiction writings in the 1880s, using her imagination and not historical records. There also were no females or children attending, since neither side would have trusted the other near their women and children. A 1623 day of Thanksgiving, in response to rains after a drought and the arrival of Captain Miles Standish, has been identified as the first Thanksgiving in Massachusetts, and it did not include indigenous Americans. After this feast in 1621, a friendship of sorts and some peace did continue for around 50 years, though mistrust and skirmishes existed. This was especially true when the Wampanoag, Narragansett, and other native tribes and colonies united against the Pequot. The alliance slowly collapsed, though, in the early 1670s, ahead of the outbreak of the King Philip War. As time went on, needing more land and resources, the Pilgrims and their descendants began massacring and annihilating native tribes, or moving them off of their lands. That first supposed Thanksgiving was in reality the beginning of the end to the area's indigenous tribes. Throughout the 17th and 18th century, communities in New England continued the ancient tradition of marking the end of the agricultural year. They were usually church-based, with a community feast after a day of fasting. Over time, these festivities turned into family reunions as well. At the time, the holiday was more associated with winter motifs. The first National Day of Thanksgiving was declared by George Washington in 1789 in order to give thanks for the new Constitution and successful establishment of the United States. A call for national unity in a young, divided nation to celebrate a moment of peace and prosperity. Washington did not tie this day to the Plymouth Feast, nor was it meant to be an annual occurrence. When the population of Protestant white Plymouth began to feel overshadowed by events in other colonies, including the American Revolution, the Old Colony Club began the push and momentum to include Plymouth in the founding myths of the United States and the lore of the supposed first Thanksgiving. It was not until the 1830s that the 1621 event was referred to as the first Thanksgiving. In 1841, a publication by Reverend Alexander Young noted that it was thought to be the first Thanksgiving, the Harvest Festival of New England. This 1841 publication is thought to have truly popularized this first Thanksgiving myth. In the 1840s, American writer Sarah Josepha Hale read an account of the 1621 event and connected the feast to contemporary Thanksgiving celebrations. She also began advocating for a national Thanksgiving holiday in 1846. It was her letter to Abraham Lincoln that inspired him to declare a national Thanksgiving Day, which he hoped would unify the country in the midst of the Civil War. He did not connect it to Plymouth. It was also Hale who popularized what is now seen as the classic Thanksgiving menu. The myth still remained in the periphery of the holiday, however, until 1889, when Jane G. Austen's Standish of Standish was published. The novel included a very sentimental account of that first Thanksgiving. The legend continued to evolve in the late 19th century when it was used by white Protestant Americans in response to their fears over immigration by Catholics and Jews. The myth allowed them to claim that Protestants had been given the land the United States now claimed. The myth also allowed New Englanders to claim the founding of their region had been done bloodlessly and peacefully, avoiding the massacre of Native Americans. It was not until 1939, under Franklin D. Roosevelt, that the holiday and the 1621 event were explicitly connected by a president. By the end of World War II, the myth and holiday were fully linked. In 1963, then-President John F. Kennedy started a proclamation talking about our country's forefathers in both Virginia and Massachusetts, but never connected anything to the 1621 event. Time magazine published an article titled "The Pilgrims: Unshakable Myth" in November of 1970, in which they credited the mythological retelling of the 1621 events to 19th century romantics. In 1970, a Native American advocacy group led by activist Wamsutta Frank James organized the first National Day of Mourning held on the same day as Thanksgiving. The National Day of Mourning is an annual protest and day of remembrance in Plymouth to honor Native Americans, ancestors, and highlight the ongoing struggles faced by indigenous peoples. The National Day of Mourning is considered by many Native Americans to be a day of mourning for the genocide of their people, theft of their lands, and the assault on their cultures, which the Thanksgiving holiday often commemorates. It is a day for spiritual connection, remembrance, and a protest against racism and oppression. It is held annually on Coles Hill in Plymouth, Massachusetts. In the 21st century, scholars and historians have continued to try to disprove the myths and dispel them, and to teach the history of the early New England colonies more accurately. An interesting aside to that is that many schoolchildren in Massachusetts visit the Recreation and Living Museum at Plymouth Plantation, Patuxet Village, where they actually learn from both pilgrim interpreters and current members of the Wampanoag tribe the real history of Plymouth and the supposed first Thanksgiving. So, although Thanksgiving may not be connected to the 1621 event and feast, and although many myths abound about the day, and although many Native Americans see it as a day of mourning, it has, in modern times, become a day to be thankful and have gratitude, a feast spent with family and friends, and in that context, it really is an incredible holiday. However, as we celebrate and receive the blessings of being grateful, perhaps we can take a moment to acknowledge the real history and what happened to the indigenous peoples of the area. We wish all of you a day of thanks with good food and good company. Happy Thanksgiving, but always remember.
Listen in next time to the Mountain Ear Podcast for more mountain history, lore, or stories. I'm Maryann Rosen. Thank you for listening.
And that's it for our show. Subscribe online to get more access to more news, weekly updates to our community calendar, and a link to our YouTube channel by visiting themountaineer.com. Be sure to use the coupon code PODCAST when subscribing for a 10% discount, only available to our listeners. If you are in the local Peak to Peak area, be sure to pick up a print edition of The Mountaineer at a local business. I'm Dango Rose. Thank you for listening.